Welcome back, students. I've prepared a bonus lecture on displaying legends in Leaflet because it's an important topic and I kind of dropped the ball in the original course. It did occur to me at one point, and I did a bit of research, and I didn't actually find any legend plugins for Leaflet, and I kind of put it in the back of my mind as something that I should look into more. And then somehow I never got around to it again. But some of you have been asking about it, and I agree that it should be covered in this course. So I'm adding it here, because I want this course to be comprehensive and include everything that you need to know about client-side programming in Leaflet. So I'll always be willing to add content as necessary. Unfortunately, there are no automatic solutions that exist in Leaflet to automatically generate legend as you can do in QGIS or ArcGIS, and that's a little bit unfortunate. However, if you've ever made a complex production quality map in a desktop GIS program, you know that you can spend an incredible amount of time getting the legend exactly right, and it's a very common source of frustration. With Leaflet, you have to build your legends yourself, and that gives you the flexibility to do almost anything that you want to do with a little bit of HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. Now, there are a couple of ways to do this. One is to create them in another software program, such as PowerPoint or Photoshop. If you have a drawing program that you're familiar with and are comfortable with, you could create your legend there and then take a screenshot of the legend and include it in your HTML code as an image. Now, this method works okay for static legends, but it's not ideal for a number of reasons. For instance, your graphics program might not have the exact same colors and dash patterns. They might not be able to handle transparency as well, and you don't have a lot of control over the background colors, etc. But you can also create legends directly in your HTML and JavaScript code. There are two common ways of doing this. First is using an HTML5 canvas element. Basically, you define a canvas element as a drawable region in your HTML, and then you can add graphics to it using JavaScript. You can look further into this on your own if you want. I won't be discussing it further in this course, but I wanted you to know that it's available. The second method, and the one that we'll be discussing for the remainder of this lecture, is using SVG, or Scalable Vector Graphics. Like the canvas, it lets you define a drawable region on your page, but then you can add graphic elements to it using SVG code. The nice thing about either one of these methods is that you can insert them in your HTML code, so you can include them in a div element and turn them on and off like any other div. And this gives you the ability to make dynamic legends that respond to the layer control events or other user-generated events. Now, as I said before, SVG stands for Scalable Vector Graphics. And most image software such as Photoshop or Microsoft Paint use raster graphics. And with raster graphics, you have individual pixels and you can change the color of them. But vector graphics are scalable because they use coordinates to create points, lines, and polygons, just like vector features in GIS. You can get very fancy with SVG graphics, and you can even do animations. The image on the left is an SVG graphic, and you can see it's pretty complicated. If it were a raster graphic and you zoomed in, you would see it getting pixelated like the image on the right. However, as a vector graphic, you could zoom in as far as you want and the lines would still be perfectly smooth. Now, SVG is an XML-based format. If you remember in my introductory course, we talked a little bit about XML as a way of storing digital data. XML is a tag-based format similar to HTML. You create an SVG graphic using tags for different types of objects, such as lines, rectangles, and circles, and you use attributes to provide more information about the object, such as the coordinates of the center point of a circle and its radius, as well as styling information. And this is great because you can create the same exact styles for your SVG graphics as you do with your GIS vector features in Leaflet. And this styling will be familiar to you because Leaflet actually uses SVG by default to display its graphics, so the styling includes things like the width of a line, color, transparency, and dash array patterns, as well as fill color and fill opacity for objects that contain areas. Now, the first step in including SVG graphics in your web page is to create a drawable area of the desired size using SVG tags. The default units for height and width of the drawable area are pixels, but you can use other units as well, such as inches or percent. In this case, no units are specified, so it will create an SVG area of 100 pixels high and 200 pixels wide. And then in between the SVG tags, you can place vector graphic elements as desired. So rectangles are created using the rect tag. And as you can see, the rect tag can take a lot of attributes. All this stuff here after the tag name is attribute information that tells the SVG how to draw or render that element. Some of the attributes include an X and a Y coordinate for the upper left corner of the rectangle. And then there are also attributes specifying the height and the width of the rectangle. And finally, a style attribute, which includes properties such as the stroke width, which specifies how wide the boundary line should be. So here the line will be 4 pixels wide. Stroke, which specifies the color of the boundary line, in this case deep pink. And although we didn't specify it here, there could also be a stroke dash array property specifying the dash pattern of the line. And then you can specify the fill color and the fill opacity for the rectangle. And again, these are the same options available to us for styling GIS features in Leaflet. So it's very convenient, and this is why I'm using SVG graphics in this lesson. Now you might also notice that the style attribute is formatted just like we do with inline CSS. And that's because that's exactly what this is. It's inline CSS for the SVG rectangle element. You can also assign IDs and classes to the SVG elements and style them with internal or external CSS as well. But for our purposes of building legends, I think it's a little bit more intuitive with inline CSS. And there's also an extension to jQuery that will let you select SVG elements and modify their attributes on the fly using jQuery. And you might want to look into that. I think it would be something that would be very useful with more complex SVG graphics, but for the purposes of this course, we're going to keep it very simple. And besides rectangles, there are other SVG elements that we'll want to use as well. Lines are formed using the line tag. They take two sets of X and Y coordinates, X1 and Y1, and X2 and Y2. And these are the start and beginning points of the line. And of course, they can take a style attribute as well, with styling properties for the line. So with the line element, you can only draw a line between 2 points. If you want a more complicated line, there's a polyline tag, but for the purposes of legends, we won't need these. But you can look further into it if you want. Now circles are formed with the circle tag, and they take the X and the Y coordinates of the center of the circle. That's the CX and CY. Plus they also take a radius attribute. That's this R attribute. And of course a style attribute filled with styling properties. And because a circle is an area type of element like a rectangle, it has the exact same styling properties that we use for the rectangle. Now text can also be added using the text tags. And unlike the other graphic element tags that we've looked at, this requires both an opening and a closing text tag. Now as far as attributes, it takes an X and a Y coordinate, and this is for the lower left point of the text. And of course we have a style attribute with some styling properties. The style properties for text elements include font family and font size, and a lot of others as well. You can change the color, or you can make it bold or italics, anything you can do with a font. And then finally you include the text value that you want displayed in between the opening and closing text tags. And when it's all said and done, the SVG code on the left will create the graphics on the right. So we have a rectangle element. It starts, the upper left corner is 10 pixels down and 10 pixels to the right. And then the element itself has a width of 50 pixels and a height of 30. And it has a deep pink boundary line and a yellow fill. Then we have a line that starts at 10 to the right and 60 pixels down. And it goes to the coordinate 60, 60. And it has a stroke width of 2 and a color of Peru. And finally, we have a circle element. Its center point is 30 pixels to the right and 95 pixels down. And it has a radius of 15 pixels. Now this also has a deep pink boundary line, and it has a dash array as well to make it a dashed boundary. And then the text element starts at 70 pixels to the right and 102 down. This is the lower left corner right here where the text starts. And it's a sans serif font with a size of 16 pixels, and the text is inactive nest. So hopefully you're getting the picture now that we can create a legend this way. And of course we can enclose the SVG inside of a div element, and we can turn that div on and off by selecting the div using jQuery and using the show, hide, or toggle jQuery methods like we've seen before many times. And this allows us to make our legends dynamic. Now you may wonder how to come up with the values for the x and y coordinates. And all I can tell you is that it helps if you have a regular pattern and to be consistent. Then you can generally just add a constant to the y values. So first you have to decide how big you want your legend graphics to be and how much space you want between them. And then it's simply a matter of addition. But I'm going to stop this lecture here. If you need to, you can get some graph paper and plot out the positions. That might help. So start thinking about how you might create a legend for the project we've been working on. In the next lecture, we'll start creating those legends in our project and adding some JavaScript to them to make them dynamic. And we'll see you then.